Hello again guys, and welcome to another video on how to paint clouds in watercolor. I'm going to be using three colours for this: indigo, cerulean blue and neutral tint, and a couple of different size brushes. So let's make a start. Okay, so the first step is an easy one. I'm just soaking the paper with a medium sized brush. You can use any size brush that you're comfortable with, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm mixing up cerulean and indigo together on the palette. Ignore the rest of the colours on the palette, it was just there from a previous painting that I couldn't be arsed clean the palette basically. So I'm just mixing up a wash that I think is appropriate for this painting. The first wash that I put down is a bit too cerulean blue, it was a bit too summery for me, so I went back in and added more indigo to darken it up, and I'm just painting the shape of the cloud. So I'm just painting in the sky, and wherever I want the cloud to be I'm leaving it white, and because the whole paper is wet, that paint will spread around the paper on its own and give you this nice soft edge, which will come back in later with smaller brushes and tissue paper to give the cloud even more shape as it's drying. I can't do it right now because it's too wet, and it'll just flow back into where I've removed the paint. While your sky is drying a little bit, it gives you a chance to paint in the bottom of the painting. I thought I was going to go for a warm brown colour, but in the end I painted over it because I didn't like it. But you can still do it this way. I just thought I'd explain it because it wouldn't make any sense to the video if the bottom of the painting was painted and I didn't explain how or why I did that. And the colours for that wash were burnt umber and cadmium red, I believe, heavily diluted with water, and then on the right hand side it was a diluted wash of cerulean blended together. And you can still do this if you want, it'll still look really nice, but by the end of the video, if you're following it, I don't think that you will. Okay, so this is what I was talking about earlier. The sky is now dry enough for me to start removing some of that paint to shape the cloud. Now what you want to do is you want the paint dry enough so that when you remove it, the rest of the paint doesn't run into that area you just removed. So you don't want it super wet. You want somewhere in between them two, and it takes practice figuring that out. And all I'm doing is I'm taking a damp, clean brush and I'm removing parts of the paint to shape the cloud. When I remove them parts, I'll wash the brush off to keep it clean, and I've got a piece of paper in my right hand and I'm dabbing the brush on the paper to make it damp again, and I'm going back in and removing paint again. I'll do a couple of swipes where I want to remove the paint, and I'll wash it off again, dab it into the tissue and do it again, and you just keep doing that until you've shaped the cloud how you want to. I also used a piece of tissue paper to remove the paint from the page, but I did this very sparingly because tissue paper can soak up all the pigment from the paper and you can ruin the shape of your clouds if you overdo it. So if you screw up the end of the tissue paper into a nice point, dab away where you want to remove it and then go back in with a brush and clean up some of the areas, it works really well. And as you can see, there's a nice fluffy dome appearing from all my tissue and brush work, so everything's going to plan. I'm adding my shadow tones now, and I'm using neutral tint for this, and I'm not mixing anything with it, it's a straight neutral tint because I find it more convenient and it makes a good shadow colour. You can mix up your own if you want. If you use like rose madder and cobalt blue together, makes a nice purpley grey colour for a shadow tone, but as you can see the neutral tint is kind of that colour anyway, and if you dilute it with water you can get different variations of value. The reason why I dabbed it on the masking tape is because I wanted to see how dark it was, because it'll dry lighter than what I need it to, and that's what I was looking for. because my first wash will be very light, so heavily diluted with water, and then I'll let it dry and add a more pigmented wash, so less water, more pigment, let it dry again, do it again, and I'll let the layers build up until I get the nice contrast that I want. But before all that even happens, I want to get my shadow area in the right places and nice and fluffy and shaped properly, so all I'm doing is letting my first wash dry a little bit, and I'm using the same method that I used to shape the top of the cloud: tissue paper and a brush, knock it back, make it nice and fluffy, shape the shadow area. Then when it's dried, I'll go in with a more pigmented wash each time, and then knock it back again with the tissue paper and the brush, and keep shaping it like that with multiple layers. As you can see, a piece of tissue paper is a great ally of yours when it comes to painting clouds, because it will take the paint off the paper and give you the white back, which is great for clouds, makes them nice and fluffy as well. But you really need to use it sparingly, because too much will just ruin the whole thing. And there is a method to my madness here. Like, I've got an idea what I want this cloud to look like, so I'm not just dabbing all over the place. I've got a shape and I'm dabbing the tissue paper in the appropriate places to create that shape, and that's what you really need to think about when you're painting clouds. So the neutral tint is fully dried now, and as you can see, it's a lot lighter than what it was when I laid it down, and that's why I did them swatches on the masking tape. I was trying to find the right value that I wanted it to be, because I wanted it to be quite light in the beginning so I can see just where my shadow is, and as I move on I'll start adding more pigmented neutral tint into the same area, but not exactly in the same place, so what's there will come through on the painting, so you'll have multiple layers of different values to show kind of like the illusion of the 3D of the cloud. But it all makes sense as I get close to the end of the painting. For now though, I wanted to add some shadow into the white area of the cloud, and I wanted this to be more of a light cerulean, so what I've done is I've pulled out some of that cerulean and indigo wash and added a load of water, and I think I added a bit more cerulean to it as well. And I'm just putting tiny marks of this cerulean wash that I've made, just to emphasize some contours and shadows inside the main white of the cloud, if that makes sense. I wanted more of the purple towards the bottom, because then it would look a bit more like a storm cloud, and then towards the top where the sun would be shining on it fully, you've got a bit of light cerulean blue, and that's what I was going for. Okay, so I'm adding the second wash of the neutral tint now, and as you can see I'm being a bit more shapely with it. You're getting some hard edges, and it's more of a mid-tone colour, so it's a bit more pigmented. It will dry lighter again, but every time I add a new wash of the neutral tint, it'll get more detailed. And how I'm doing this is I'm adding the pigment on the paper, so the paint, and then I'm getting a clean wet brush and I'm just softening the edges, and I'll just keep doing that all over where I want the shadow to be, but not all of it, because like I said, you want to keep that lighter colour. You want different levels of value from the layers that you're producing to produce that 3D effect. And as you can see from that tiny bit of detail that I've added from that second layer of the neutral tint, that you can start to see the cloud take shape. What I've got in my head has been reproduced on the paper. I love how artwork does that. It's like an absolute mess in the beginning and you can't really tell what's going on, and a tiny bit of detail just sets it all off and it all starts to make sense. While the shadow colour is drying, I've decided to add in some of that blue shadow colour that I mentioned earlier, but I'm being a bit more pigmented, so a darker value. And my idea is I want to pull more cloud into the foreground and push some cloud more into the background, so I'm trying to create some depth. And I'm doing this by layering the clouds. So what I'm doing is I'm painting the blue in a line that's shaping around the cloud a bit, as you can see. And then I'm getting a damp clean brush and I'm spreading that paint out. And as you do this, it'll dilute and transition into the white, and this will create a lot of depth if you do it a couple of times. So it's kind of like layers of clouds, and it should push parts of the painting back into the background. And as I add more contrast to the shadow tone, it should bring the foreground cloud like more in your face, if that makes sense. That was a really long-winded explanation, and it'll take you a bit of time reproducing this, but it really is worth it if you can do it right. I promise, it's really worth it. Okay, so now it's time to go full contrast, and it's straight neutral tint with a tiny bit of water. I really can't go any darker with this paint. And I'm just creating, again, detailed areas with the neutral tint. And then I'm using a damp wet brush to spread it, and I'm getting some mid-tones out of it as well. And as you can see, as soon as I add that really high valued neutral tint, the shadow colour, to the paper, it pushes the cloud further back. Like the lighter tones are pushed back into the painting, and that's because a darker value is always more in the foreground, and that will always push the lighter colours back. Now I should have left it here because it looks more realistic and natural, but I didn't. I kept going and I got carried away, and you'll see that towards the end. So what happened was, even though my cloud still looks good, it looks like it's closer than what it should be. If I would have just left it as it was, with a small bit of contrast at the bottom, kind of protruding up into the cloud a little bit, that bulk of the cloud would have been pushed further back, and it would have made the painting have more depth. So I would have stopped it here. And sometimes, if you've been painting all day, you forget that you should, stand away from your painting and take a look at it from a distance, so you know what it's done. And that's where you get carried away. I mean, the camera does quite a good job of showing you the distance, where if you're painting it, the painting is quite close to your face, quite close to your eyeballs, so like you can't see what's right and what's wrong sometimes, and that's why you should take a break and look at it from a distance. If I would have done that, I probably would have left it as it was. But like I said, it still turned out good. I'm not bothered, but when I look at it now in the video editor as I'm talking to you down the mic, I'm thinking to myself, God, I wish I just left it. It looks so much better. And now, because I've told you where I've gone wrong, you're not going to make the same mistake. I'm sure you're not going to. But like I said, it's just straight neutral tint. If you're not using neutral tint and you can't get it this dark, add some Payne's grey, like neat Payne's grey from a tube, into that mix I said earlier, like rose madder and cobalt blue. It'll darken it up. It might be quite hard to get a dark tone of rose madder and cobalt blue. I'm not really sure, so I think you're best adding in a wash of Payne's grey into it or something like that to make it that dark. Or if you want to use rose madder and cobalt blue as their neutral tint, but you've got a tube of neutral tint, add some neutral tint into it. You might get an even nicer colour. Might have more of a more purpley hue to it, maybe. I don't know. Give it a try. Knock yourself out. I've let the shadow colour dry completely now, and as you can see, I've got some really nice contrast colours. I just went a bit too far with them, like I said before. What's done is done. Doesn't really matter anymore. And now I'm adding that cerulean blue and indigo wash that I used for the sky, and I'm just painting it over the top of the neutral tint, i.e. the shadow colour. I've just added a bit more indigo to the mix, and I've done this to create a more of a storm cloud effect. It's also nice to see different colours inside your paintings, because it won't be as boring. Because if You look at the sky, there's tons of colours. You can pick any colours you want really, as long as they work for you. And the values are right, it just works. And that's why I've done it. There's no special reason why I've added that in. You'll see in a minute that I actually add a bit of straight cerulean over the top as well. And that's just for a bit of artistic flair really, because you know, I like a lot of contrast in my paintings. In case you haven't noticed, if you watch my previous videos, I've got loads of contrast in my work, and that's why I've done it. It's just, you know, just straight neutral tint. It works, it will always work, but you know, if you want to add a little bit of artistic flair, a bit of yourself into the painting, you know, I've added some indigo and cerulean blue. That's all I've done. And for the last bit of this painting, but not least, is that I've got a damp flat watercolour brush, and I'm just pulling the pigment back off the paper because I like how it stains the page. I do this a lot with watercolour artwork that I do. I like to go quite heavy with my contrast and then take a damp brush and pull it away because it'll leave a lighter stained version of what you painted on originally. So I do that quite a lot, and I will spend a good few hours doing this. I know it looks like I've done it like really quick because the video is only about 20 minutes long, but it probably took me about 6 hours to paint this, so you can imagine that I've probably spent a long time pulling that paint away. Sometimes I'll even wet the area as much as I can and then dab it with tissue paper because I want to take it as pretty much clean off. But you know, have a go at laying down really heavy contrast and then try and remove it. Just take a clean damp brush, rub it on top and kind of pull it away, and you'll be surprised, you get some really nice effects with it. You should definitely give it a try. Okay then guys, that's it. This is the final painting, and as you can see from the left hand side, I spent a long time lifting the paint away, trying and get back what I had before, and you know the reasons why I explained in the video. And the cloud looks a lot closer to the view than what I wanted, but you can still utilize this. If you look at the bottom, you could actually turn that into an ocean, and the cloud can sit on top of the ocean. You could have a little sailing boat sailing through the clouds into the storm, something like that. That's what I see with it. So if this wasn't a little demo tutorial, you know, I probably would have turned into something like that if it was a proper painting. But I think it turned out great either way, and if you liked it, you know, let me know in the comments. If you learned something as well, let me know in the comments. Please like, subscribe. Thank you very much for watching.